Looking for a fun way to win 25 times your money this football and basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/play100 and use code PLAY100. That's code PLAY100 at prizepicks.com/play100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
So Martin Davis has, over the last few years, become a really, really good friend. Martin creates very special books. Books like no one else creates. Big, big books. You could call them coffee table books, but it would depend on the size of your coffee table. His latest, Arnold Palmer, American Hero, is what I think another in his long line of definitive books. Jones, Hogan, Nelson, Nicholas, the Ryder Cup, and more. Just some of what's come before, and now the definitive book on Arnold. Here's my conversation with Martin Davis.
I'm just fine. Thanks for having me, John.
Thanks for doing this. Why now? Why Arnold?
You know, I've been fortunate that I've done a few large coffee table books on Ben Hogan and then on Bobby Jones and Byron Nelson and Jack, and then a huge one on the Ryder Cup. And I knew we were missing Arnold, and in more than one way. And it was about time. I mean, he passed away. I don't know. It's 6 years ago.
Yep.
Everybody loved Arnold, including me.
How long does something like this take to get done?
It takes, this one was about 3.5 or 4 years from the time you start it. And then it's sort of organic because it just grows. The way I do books is very different than a lot of the big New York publishers, where they have sort of a fixity of number of pages and what they're going to do and number of photos. I just kind of let it go and take it where it will. And we find the damnedest things. We really do.
What's the most difficult part of this whole process, doing a book like this?
I hate to say this, there's nothing difficult. It's a pure joy in doing it. But this one was particularly difficult, more so than normal, because this book has 650, maybe 700 photos, many never before published. And one of the joys is finding those photos. I knew where a number of them were, but during COVID, for a 2-year period, we couldn't get at a lot of them. A lot of people didn't have them online or have them scanned, and then people weren't going into their offices. So that made this one more difficult, and we had expected to come out with this a little bit earlier.
How did you come up with the title American Hero?
Those things, John, the more I kept reflecting on Arnold and that, it just seemed so appropriate. And he really is. And the funny thing is how I have these books set up with essays up front on the big personalities in golf, and then the game day stories in the back 2/3 of the book with big pictures and what happened in big events, win or lose, or big events in their lives. It was with the Arnold book. Usually we have 4 or 5 of those essays up front with an introduction or two. I mean, this book, I guess the forewords are by Doc Giffen, who was Arnold's right-hand man for over 50 years, and and Gary Player. And we'd start, then we have about 4 or 5 essays on different aspects of their life. And the funny thing about this book was every time we'd start investigating one thing, in other words, we'd look under a rock and say, geez, we want to do that, we'd find 2 more rocks. So I don't know, there's 15, 16, 17 essays up front. And the essays are like long magazine articles. And it's some of the very best writers in golf that participate. Yeah, that are good friends of mine and yours as well.
Mm-hmm. We are talking with Martin Davis here on the Augusta Golf Show. It's been 6 years since he's passed, and you spent time with him. It's like he spent time with everybody, but he couldn't have spent time with everybody. But you did get to do that. When you think back to Arnold, what do you remember the most about being with him?
You know, that's a great question. It was really the personal connection that he would have with everyone that he knew, not hugely well, but he came across as a real person, this personality that he just wanted to be your friend. And what was interesting about the book with the title American Hero, Peter Jacobson, who wrote one of the pieces, and Nancy Lopez and Kelly Tillman also wrote pieces, and I think Charlie Meacham wrote. They all referred to him as their hero, and they didn't know the title of the book. So I think it's sort of a widely thought of and appreciated honor for Arnold. I mean, and people think of him in that way.
You know, it's funny. You've referred to him this way. A lot of people are familiar with his accomplishments on the golf course, and many are familiar with his accomplishments off the golf course. But most people would call him Arnie, but his close friends called him Arnold, didn't they?
They did. They really did, and it was just. You know this. I mean, with being around him, even if it was on a one-on-one or in a group setting, or even a large group setting, there was a certain electricity in the air with Arnold. You know, he did so much, and he may be considered the most important figure we've had in golf, certainly in the last 50 or 60 years. In growing the game and building the game and having, you know, his personal values that he grew up with, that he would talk to other people about. I mean, he was notorious in a good way for talking to the other, especially younger golf professionals about how to act, how to comport themselves. And quite honestly, we miss that now. There isn't a major figure that's done that. In all due respect to Jack, but I mean that was Arnold's role. You know, he was everybody's guy.
He would always tell the young pros, "Sign your name so someone can read it." Yeah. He
said, "Take your time. You know, do that." There was a funny thing I saw this morning on the internet with somebody had a fast speed up of Ian Poulter signing a lot of pages. It was very funny. You know, his and it's exactly what Arnold wouldn't do. You know, and he would instruct everyone to do that. He had this wonderful way of giving of himself. And I mean, I was the recipient of it on a number of occasions, but one in particular was this, as I think you know well about this, is this scholarship we started under Dave Marr's name, who was a good friend of Arnold's at the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia in New York. It's the best journalism school in the world. And Arnold we had 3 outings to fund it over about 10 years. And it's an endowed scholarship now. And some of the best young writers in golf today, believe it or not, have been recipients of that. And Arnold just gave of himself. The last outing was, I think, in 2014. And I called Doc up and Arnold, and I said, we're having this another outing. Can you make it?" And he said, "Well, my game's not for display anymore."
Yeah.
And then quickly, I think he could hear my heart sink. He quickly said, "But I'll come for lunch." And that's all anybody wanted. I mean, it was one of the great days.
How do you describe the size of your books?
This book runs 372 pages, and it's 11 by 14, and it weighs about 8 pounds. So it's a long read, and it's like having a 50-pound box of Godiva chocolate. You can't eat it all at once. It's meant to be savored over a long period of time. But I always joke, I said, if you get tired reading, you can always work out with it because it's a big book. A lot of gatefolds. You've seen them. Brad Faxon did an analysis of Arnold's, I guess we can call it quite contorted putting stroke, which is a fold out to almost 4 feet. And Jimmy McClain did an analysis of his full swing. One other person, I could mention a lot of people that were involved, but one in particular is just, in my opinion, and he's a good friend of ours, but probably the best pure golf writer or journalist over the last, 40 years is Jaime Diaz, and his piece is just spectacular.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the things in the book, an enormous amount of material. Let's touch on a couple of things that the listener might not know about. Just about everybody knows about things about Arnold, about his popularity, about the marketing in which he was involved. And I don't want to give away too many stories in the book, but you tell a story that talks about Arnold and Howdy Doody.
I knew you were going to bring that up. That ran as a sidebar in the bio article that Marino Parasenzo from Pittsburgh did. And that story, I'm positive, has never been told in golf circles. The man involved was a fellow by the name of Martin Stone, who was as old as my father. And he was a very good friend of my family. Turns out Martin wasn't a golfer. A very, very interesting man. Before World War II, he had graduated. He just had graduated when the war started from Yale Law School and joined the Navy. And his background was just, it's another, like Arnold's life was another American dream. And he ended up in the White House during the war writing Lend-Lease with the Russians. And, as a young lawyer. After the war, he ended up, 5 or 6 years later, still as a young man, as a partner at investment banking house Lehman Brothers. And then he got involved in early television. And the early television that he produced and owned was Howdy Doody, which was the puppet, the marionette that most people know about. Now, fast forward to early 1960s. It's probably, and Martin told me the story, and I know it just didn't get out to golf circles. And it was very funny. He got a call one day, actually from another Yale lawyer, Mark McCormick, much later than Martin, but and McCormick said, "I understand you've done some merchandising with your characters from your show." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Could I come in and see you with my client into New York?" And they were Cleveland based. So Martin said, "Sure." And then McCormick shows up with Arnold. Mm-hmm. And what Martin had done was to merchandise Howdy Doody, was to put his image on those little tin lunch boxes that I'm not embarrassed to say. I had one as a kid. That was the big popular thing. And you'd carry your lunch to school when you were in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade. So McCormick asked him, "How do you do this? And what's this all about?" It actually had started years before with Mickey Mouse and Disney, but Martin took it to another level. So he explained it. So the sidebar says, and it has a picture of Howdy Doody on the lunchbox. And then the other photo in the sidebar, as you know, is a picture of Arnold on the Arizona iced tea with the drink that he gave. And, Arnold was on a lot of products, but it really kind of started. There was this connection with Howdy Doody and how do you do it? And they sold a lot of lunch boxes, and they have sold a lot of they've sold a lot more iced tea than they sold of lunch boxes. But it's kind of a funny connection and a funny story.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit matchup to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
Let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the major championships. And, of course, we start with the Masters. Everybody knows that Arnold won the Masters 4 times, 58, 60, 62, 64. But you bring out in the book that kind of led to a series of events over an 8-year span, didn't it?
Oh, it sure did. Actually, you can always do the discussion about would have been, could have been if he did this and that, and it came so close. But Arnold legitimately should have won in 59 when Art Wall won, and he should have won again in 61 when he double bogeyed 18 to lose by 1 after a perfect drive to Gary Player. It was for 8 consecutive years, Arnold was involved, and you've seen the pictures in the book. We run it across the bottom. Arnold was involved in every green jacket ceremony for 8 years. 50, 81, so he gets the jacket. 59, he puts the jacket on Art Wall. 60, Art Wall puts the jacket on Arnold. 61, Arnold puts the jacket on Gary. 62, Arnold, it has the jacket put on him. 63 is Jack. And Arnold puts the jacket on him. And then 64, Jack puts it back on Arnold. And then, of course, in 65, when Jack just blitzed the course, Arnold put the jacket on him. So he was involved in 8, and that's never going to happen again. I think
you're right.
Fair to say that's never going to happen again.
U.S. Open. He won 1 U.S. Open, famously Cherry Hill's classic Arnold charge. And I don't want you to have to do the math here, but in the book, you make a case that he played in the national championship arguably just as well or maybe better than he played in the Masters. You don't have to get into the raw numbers, but you do make that case.
I did my one of my essays up front was on where did Arnold play his best golf. At the end of the day, because he won 4 times at the Masters and came so close a couple of other times, and he really dominated the 60s at the Masters, and in the very late 50s. Everybody points to the Masters as where he played his best golf. But when you look at the numbers, and we go through all of that in the book and calculate what it was, Arnold, the heartbreak with Arnold, and it just showed his humanity when you look at some of the pictures of the anguish, losing to Nicklaus in 62 in the playoff at Oakmont, and in 63 to Burroughs at the Country Club. And then, the biggest one of all was 66, which would have broken any mortal man, was to Casper at San Francisco at Olympic. It was. But when you look at the numbers, his total scoring, it was just a hair off over the 21 years, the heart of his career. A little bit, just a hair higher at the Open. And you could make the case that I think a lot of us would agree that it's easier to win the Masters than it is the Open. It's certainly not easy to win, but because of the smaller field and because of the invitational nature of the past champions and the amateurs, especially in Arnold's day. I mean, they had up to 20 amateurs playing, 20 amateurs playing in a field that was, 100, 90, 80 players. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a very different. So you can say that Arnold, you can make the argument that he played better in the Open. However, the idea is to win and win major championships, and he did more of that at Augusta than he did at the Open. I mean, you can even go to 1972. We all associate 72, the Open at Pebble Beach, with Jack's win when he hit that one iron on the 71st hole, and he hit at that huge par 3 going out towards the ocean, hit the flagstick. Everybody said, "Oh, that was Jack's Open." Well, Arnold was right there the final 9 holes. I mean, he was so close in so many events. So you have to. It's kind of an interesting exercise.
And if that's not enough, he's also credited with saving what was the British Open, the Open Championship.
Absolutely. You have to go back to after the war. Sam Snead had some sort of a commitment. It was a corporate commitment from one of his sponsors in 1946, right after the war, to play in the Open Championship. And it was at St. Andrews, appropriately, after the war. And the funny story was that Sam pulled into the train station at St. Andrews, and he looks out the window. You know how the train tracks run through the courses or parallel to the courses. And Sam looks out the window. I guess he was asleep. And he kind of says to no one in particular, boy, that looks like an old abandoned golf course, run-down golf course. And there was some old Scot sitting there and just chewed him out saying, "My man, I'll tell you, that's the old course. That's the mother." And Snead won that. He won that, and his winnings didn't cover his expenses in going to the tournament. So by 1960, it's when Arnold really became Arnold in 1960, the Arnold that we know. I mean, we'd like to go back to 58, but he was not expected to be the next great player picking up the mantle of Hogan in the late 50s, although he had won the U.S. Amateur in 56. So in 1960, he wins the Masters by birdieing the last 2 holes to win by 1 over Venturi again. He had aced him in 58, but that was one of his very first charges. And then, of course, the being, I guess it was 7 back at Cherry Hills in the U.S. Open. And then old Bob Drum came up with the idea of Arnold. Jones had the Grand Slamming that included the 2 national amateur championships as well as the 2 Opens. He said you could win, and this was really where the concept of the professional major started and the professional slam. You could do that. So he went over, and since Arnold was clearly the leader and beloved in the country, and he finished second, as I recall, by 1 stroke in that Open. But it really revitalized, the oldest championship there was. And then, of course, he won the next 2 years in 61 and 62. So the British Open is really because the status that it has today among the top couple of tournaments is because of Arnold.
And then he never wins the PGA. Did that stick in his craw?
Oh boy, did that really bothered him. And the reason it bothered him, not that it was necessarily the 4th major that he never won, and that was the hole in his resume. it was because he wanted to win it. One of the themes in Arnold's life was that he was always looking for his father's approval. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I've read enough of other people talking about this that it's a very plausible concept. He was always trying to get his father's approval. And it was the one thing, he wanted to win it for his father. And he never did. He came close 2 or 3 times. He did win the senior PGA championship when he was a senior. And he had sort of this melancholy statement saying, well, at least it says PGA on it.
Couple of questions here in the time we have left. These days, popularity explodes because of social media. Nobody bigger than Tiger. But if you're not old enough, back in the day, without the technology of social media, you can make the case, I think easily, that around the world, Arnold was just as popular then as Tiger is today.
Probably more so. You have to remember, Arnold came along. It took us a while to get over the Depression and the war. You can make the argument, I think plausibly, that it was World War II that got us out of the Depression finally because of the massive mobilization. But after the war, we had Ike as president in 1952. And then one of Ike's big achievements was building the interstate highway system. And the country really started to recover after the war financially. So people had more money to travel and for leisure, and they could get in the car and get to places. So it was in this cauldron that there was this incredible mixture of this young, attractive athlete, and Arnold was certainly an athlete. I mean, you look at his golf swing, it wasn't pretty like Snead's or technically perfect like Hogan's, but who pulled himself up by his bootstraps in the best Horatio Alger tradition, and won at Augusta, became friendly with Ike, and then all of a sudden, guess what happened? It was television came on, and in the late 50s, they started broadcasting it on television. So it was within this milieu, this combination of things that were happening, that it was this toxic in a very positive sense mixture. I mean, if they had the internet then, I mean, I'm not sure they would have heard as much about Tiger as we know today.
In all of this, and you knew him, did you learn anything about him doing this book?
Oh, the more I hear people tell stories, I mean, I hear about more kindnesses, and it's different from the other people that we've done books on, Ben Hogan and Byron Nelson and Jack and Bobby Jones. Arnold was great in a different way, although he won 62, times on the tour and all those major championships in just incredible ways. But it was the kindness and the personality that he really sold golf. He sold it to the American public. And he had a great time doing it. And, John, we had a great time being part of it.
Yeah.
Even though it was later in our lives that, we could hear about, the 58 and the 60 Masters that we may have, that I saw on television, little black and white set.
In a positive way, and you alluded to something like this a little bit earlier in our conversation, and I mean this in a positive way. Nobody loved being Arnold more than Arnold.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. That's very true. There's a story about Winnie was at a bar someplace talking to someone with Arnold, and Arnold was at the end of the bar, and she remarked to the person that she was with, because there was nobody around Arnold, and she said, "Look how lonely he looks. He needs people." And people needed Arnold.
Are the Arnold stories endless?
Yeah, and I think, a lot of the stories in golf, especially the Ben Hogan stories, a lot of them were embellished and made up. A bunch of them I happen to know about that, having done a couple of books and TV things on him and a little bit of radio. the Arnold stories are by and large, true. I mean, they're was he perfect? No, nobody is, but he just represented that American ideal of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, making something of yourself, and working hard and being a good guy. And that was Arnold.
I alluded in the beginning of our conversation that the book was not out yet. It's going to make a great Christmas gift, holiday gift. What can you say about when someone might be able to get this book and how they might be able to get it?
We're expecting that the book will be we print the book, believe it or not, in Italy. They're the best art book printers in the world, and these are really art books with the quality of the paper and the reproduction and color separating the black and, without getting into all the technicalities, color separating the black and whites for the ultimate in fidelity, without enhancing anything, but just pulling out of what's there. So we expect books back in end of October, beginning of November, and we're just working on setting it up for Amazon. Will probably be the prime place.
Okay. I know from the sidelines how much love, energy, effort, care you put in to all of your books. But did this one take you the longest?
No, the one that took the longest, because it was the complete history of the Ryder Cup.
Okay. All right.
And it had all the essays too. But this was second. And every time I do a book, I hate to say this, I probably should say, this was the one I liked the best. But whenever I do a book, the one that I'm doing at the time is my favorite. And I guess at one point or another, I'll look back and say, okay, which one, if I can pick one, was really the favorite. But I just reveled in the stories that people would tell me and the things that people would find out and that I never knew about. And Arnold was the same with me as with from what I gathered, with his best friends like Peter Jacobsen. He played in 40 of those annual tournaments that Peter had. It was. He was the same with everyone, very consistent, and he just a very, very special person. I always like to say that there were few great men, certainly in this world in the last century. You could probably say Churchill and Jonas Salk, and I think you have to put Arnold in that grouping as well. Did a lot of good for a lot of people, and made a lot of people feel really good about golf and about themselves.
He is Martin Davis. The name of the book, Arnold Palmer, American Hero. I am proud to call Martin a friend, and I deeply appreciate you spending this much time talking about this, Martin. Thank you for doing this.
And I'm very glad to call you one of my good friends as well. Thanks, John. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.